Hello and welcome back to an episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today I'm very pleased. Joining me for the third time, a great friend that actually were introduced by a good friend also as well, I believe 3 years ago. I have with me today Shashank Tiwari. He's the CEO and founder of Uno.ai. Shashank, it's a great pleasure to have you again here today. I'm happy that we are recording this almost beginning of the year. We're still in January on the time of this recording. So it's good to see you again and also discuss maybe a little bit about, what you've been doing in the past year, and also we're gonna discuss some trends. Without further ado, Shashank, like just for folks who maybe they are listening or maybe watching this for the first time, just a reminder, who are you, what you're currently building.
Absolutely. Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me one more time. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you a few years ago. And I think it's been quite awesome coming to your show over and over again. And as you mentioned, a third time, which is quite outstanding. So I feel very blessed, very thankful for that. For those who may have not seen me on this show or have never heard of us, we are a Silicon Valley based startup. A little over 3.5 years old company. Uh, Leaders in the area of AI agentic automation and AI agentic platform in the world of GRC, ERM, TPRM and BCM. These are essentially the sort of sub buckets of risk and compliance that are very critical for companies that are in the banking, healthcare, large critical industries and, sort of public, right? So that's the sector we kind of service. And our main value prop is very simple, right? Like we try to automate away a lot of human centric tasks. And by doing that, we obviously give massive amounts of productivity boost. But while we are doing that whole productivity boost, we like to balance that with what is super important and critical for the enterprise, and which is accuracy, reliability, a system that is dependable, right? So that's what we bring to the table essentially.
Great. And thank you again, Shashank, for being here with me today. I will start the discussion because, I think it's everywhere in the news. It's top of mind, maybe for a lot of decision makers in the industry when they hear about the AI and AI agents. Things changed since we last spoke because, of course, yeah, I remember the first time and second time the majority of the talk, was about LLMs. It was about, the generative AI, part of the house. Now we are talking completely new level over here. So maybe if you can start, Shashank, on a high level, not necessarily just in your space, like how have you seen this shift? And then, how this is also shaping the way, you decided with the team on how the product should look like in the age of agentic AI.
Yeah, no, it's a very relevant question. And the reality, Mehmet, is that the pace of innovation has been incredible. Not only last year, but over the last 2 3 years. So we've seen a lot of trends come and go. In fact, we've seen a lot of this development in the broader world of AI. It seemed like this was really game changing. This is going to really kind of unearth some completely new possibilities. And then a few months and sometimes even few days later, we see yet another advancement which kind of outcompetes it and almost makes it irrelevant or redundant. So the pace of innovation has been very fast. There's no denying that. And certainly these systems, primarily LLM at the heart of it, but multiple other things in and around it, have accelerated the ecosystem at large, right? So it's about a lot more people who have gotten involved in this. Everything from users on one side to builders and developers to people who integrate with it to traditional companies, who are sort of waking up to that reality of LLMs. So there has been a lot of action. There's no two ways in that, right? Now, what I do see, despite all this excitement and despite all this, sort of the achievements of large language models and in general, the sort of, call it transformer based AI that has happened so far, um, being deep into the trenches and having seen this technology mature and, having seen how it's going, um, I feel at this point in time, actually, it is not moving into a further specialized technology. In fact, what we're going to see is that it is going to get more and more commoditized. And I think some of that is evident anyway. Right? Like some of that is pretty clear because there are so many foundational models and they outcompete each other, on a sort of a weekly basis, each trying to be top of the leaderboard and the next one comes in and displaces that for a little bit. And also the growth and advancement is again happening, what I would say is in a certain type of activities or a certain type of tasks. So eventually, what's going to happen, in my opinion, is that those kinds of tasks would get very commoditized. And in other words, you will have multiple choices to accomplish the same end goal. Those LLMs might come from big labs here in the United States, close home here in Silicon Valley, or they might come from open source, sort of cohorts coming out of Europe or even China, or, for that matter, even the Middle East. Or it might be from somewhere else. Every other country, every other geography is also kind of, stepping up to now have their own local or sort of localized LLMs in play. So eventually that'll become like the operating system effectively, right? Like there would be certain capabilities which are exceptional, but the funny thing is the more exceptional and the more widespread it gets, the less important and less special it becomes, right? For example, like today, if you were to look at your laptop, so for that matter, even your phone, the fact that it can multitask so many things at the same time, the fact that the level of audio video rendering that these devices on our hand can now accomplish have come a long way from where they were even a few years ago, right? You've got a powerful computer, for example, in your pocket, right? Each one of us have it, and it's there everywhere, right? Pretty much available around the globe. And the prices have fallen, and they're there in multiple brands and multiple form factors, right? It's not just about one kind of a technology. And the same thing is going to happen to large language models. They will become very commoditized. They'll become extremely prevalent, and they will probably become cheaper, right, over a period of time because competition will drive the prices down. So then coming to your point of, well, where's this agentic or other things going? I think that's where we will see emergence of what I would call more solution centric or new types of approaches being built on top of this, right? Because it is getting pushed down the stack to become commoditized, become the operating system, become taken for granted. The question is, well, what comes on top of it, right? And so, what is that special secret sauce or unique advantage that helps us all build something more interesting, right? Or something more meaningful. So I feel like those will be different abstractions. We don't exactly know where it will go, but it will definitely be more domain specific, more specialized techniques. It might be an amalgamation of techniques, might be completely new techniques. It might be a mix of some things that are still in the realm of science fiction and some others that are good old technologies that are reborn, with new sort of adaptability and new applications, right? So that's what we're going to see effectively, I think, in the coming months and years. As much as the popular media might say, no, it's going to be smarter LLMs and AGI is going to come. I don't think we are going there, actually, to be very honest.
Really? You don't think so?
I don't think AGI is coming the way it was originally conceived.
Okay.
And this is a debate that I think, we can all have all day long, right? Because
Of course.
by nature of the fact that nobody defined very precisely what AGI meant, it was like a catch-all term that was thrown out there, saying this is super intelligence, right? And so then we went down to a very foundational sort of a question of, well, what exactly super intelligence means, right? And so if we say super intelligence means the ability to remember things at scale, or do human like tasks at scale, well, maybe then AGI is already here, right? If that's the
Exactly.
definition, right? So it all becomes on the definition, right? I think of AGI more as a thinking machine, human like machine that has fresh thinking, that can think on its own. The classic sort of sci-fi incarnation of the Skynet, that's going to be like as smart as the human. Um, I don't think LLM technology is getting us there at all, as much as anybody would like to say that.
Yeah, so and this, of course, we will not debate this here. As you
Right.
said, we're gonna take this. Just my 2 cents on this matter. I strongly agree with you when you said like if we think that a machine that can do large number of tasks at scale, we are really having this
Already
now,
there. Right.
and we see like actually majority of these LLM producing companies they now have these very good agents that they are good at what they do. I think they fixed the issue of the memory. Of course, we still have the hallucinations and all these things, but I mean,
Mhm.
the ability to have like extended memories and being able to do these deep thinking they call it sometimes, some chain of thoughts. Like each company they
Mhm.
have their own
Mhm.
terminology. Yeah, so if you consider this AGI, actually, by the way, by itself it's a great achievement. I mean,
Absolutely.
what we have, um the way I see it is a machine that comes up without me writing a prompt. to go and do
Hmm.
something which is meaningful. Like for me, this is AGI, right? Like for
Of
example,
course.
contemplating by itself and then saying, hey, like we need to go and do a research in this area, let's say of physics or chemistry,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
then doing actual experiments, like same as a human will have the logic. I think we are not there yet, and I'm not sure if we're gonna have this anytime soon. But yeah, it's great achievement that we have been seeing for the past 2 3 years now. Now I want to focus a little bit, Shashank, in terms of GRC, and for people who doesn't know what GRC is governance, risk,
Mm.
and compliance.
Right.
Now AI actually added also its own challenges
Oh,
for
indeed. Right.
for mainly risk, I would say.
Hmm.
You
Yes.
correct me on the govern and compliance as well. You correct me on the governance part because I'm not the expert there. But at least from risk perspective, we started to see also AI being a threat itself. Um, from compliance perspective, I think shared a couple of minutes ago, like also how, like even people on a high level of, they should be the most secure places in the world, they go and they do stuff with LLM chatbots, what they are not supposed to do. So how AI also changed the landscape of how we as humans we see GRC in general.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a very valid point, what you're saying. And I think more than just GRC per se, right? Like, which of course is a broad category of its own. There's governance, which is about how we decide and run sort of our organizations, to risk and compliance. The broader, I guess, question at hand, and something we should think about it is, how is AI making us work differently in our current sort of organizational setup and workflows, right? And so, what is really happening is that as this technology is becoming smarter, as this technology is sort of expanding and beginning to do what I would say human type of tasks, right? And I mean, in fact, be more specific to give some examples. We've got now pretty smart coding agents that writes code, right, on behalf of people. The so-called vibe coding, right, that is becoming bigger and bigger lately. Or AI stepping in to do a lot of human type of thinking or reasoning tasks, where it's again authoring content, or helping make decisions, or sometimes even making decisions, right, as a part of the agentic flows. The first question that comes up is, of course, the autonomy around these systems. So if these systems are autonomous, if these systems are going to make decisions, uh, they will obviously also impact it adversely as much as they will impact it positively, right? And especially if they are malicious in nature, or they in some way are made to behave in a malicious manner, they could be even more harmful than humans, because they could really have impact at scale, right? So that's the kind of the first premise that one has to think about. And then, of course, there's the second aspect of it, which is the humans and their interaction with these systems. And it could even mean something as simple as, what do we put into an LLM prompt, or what do we expose ourselves to when we are interacting with these public, large language models or AI systems? What are we divulging? What kind of information are we making inadvertently public, or putting it out in the sphere without realizing? That also imposes on itself a whole bunch of risk and compliance parameters, right? So certainly, I think, as much as the technology steps in to help you maybe get better at managing some of these, parallelly it's sort of opening its own new threat vector, right? Parallelly, it's becoming its own enemy in a way, right? Where it's now exposing us to newer threats, completely new types of risks, completely new types of compliance nightmares that we hadn't thought of, right? And on that front, in fact, I'll mention, like a couple of days ago, I was speaking to a healthcare leader, who was very, sort of deep into this thought process around business continuity, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
And this healthcare leader was really sort of mulling over the fact that, our supply chains have become very, very distributed and very global. And with so much of also, just uh, the broader sort of changing world order globally, risks have increased in any case, right? Because the threat vectors have increased, and dependency has become, a little more fuzzier than ever before. And so the business continuity should look at vendors and third party and fourth party, et cetera, as a part of their risk. And then suddenly, as we were discussing, the fact was that now not only your systems, but your vendor systems, your vendors' vendor systems, and then of course, everything else you consume is also being influenced and powered by AI, right? in some form or the other. They're all trying to infuse and bring in these AI level automations. So now you're not only fighting with, let's say, a supply chain risk, which might be more systemic and human centric, but also you are now working with business continuity in the era of things that you don't even fully understand and things that are unpredictable, and things that are interacting with systems that may have autonomy without us fully realizing what that boundary of that autonomy is, right? So you might see one next big outage where flights won't take off and the power grids might fail because of some AI deciding to do it. Who knows, right? And it won't be surprising. And the question then would be, well, what does recovery look like in that universe? Because today, if switch fails or a person kind of maliciously does something, we know how to recover from those. How do we recover from an agentic system, which their next move might be worse than the one that has caused an outage? So there are a lot of those risks or newer kinds of, sort of threat vectors that are coming upon us. There's no two ways on that. That's becoming front and center for sure.
I have a lot of follow-up questions. I'll start with the first one that came to mind now. Um, One of the things that I read a lot about it last year, and of course, still continuing in 2026, the problem in general with when it started with the generative AI and people wanted to do this AI transformation, the problem was sometimes they don't have enough data, sometimes, they don't have enough, actually, they didn't document their policies, processes, and so on. So are we still seeing the same thing now? Especially like in the domain you are in, Shashank. Like I have, and this is the other day actually because you mentioned outages. I was discussing with someone, and I had a guest who was talking also about it, but he's more into the DevOps space, and they are trying to do
Hmm.
like this
Hmm.
switch that can, actually get you back. Um, so I said, like, do companies actually have well documentation? And I have little bit, I can claim I have a little bit business continuity background in previous
Right.
lives.
Yeah.
Do they
Yes.
have now, with all these complexities, do people have this in front of them? Can they go and say, and of course I don't want to point to a vendor, but it happened, so it's in the news. So let's say when the Cloudflare outage happened, or for example, let's say one of the hyperscalers, they have an outage. Do people actually have, Shashank, today a full map of what is affecting what in case of that? So because before doing anything, we need to have these. Are we still having these challenges in the enterprise today?
Very much so. I think so. And well, let me sort of set more context, right, before just giving a
Sure.
dry, simple answer of saying whether it is or it is not. Um, there are two or three factors that have occurred over the last year, right? And some of them are good and some of them are confusing. Let me say that.
Right.
So, for example, like, yeah, do companies now have some sort of an AI governance policy and AI governance structure? Are they thinking about it? I think the answer is generally yes, right? Especially companies that have started using AI quite a bit, or it's been widespread in the company. There is a policy, right? There is a governing structure or a body or a some mechanism. And yes, they do think about it and discuss it. Trying to put some safeguards and structures around it. So, like, do they do that? Is there something of that? The answer is probably yes, right? Now, the question is, how effective is that AI governance in place? Or is it effective at all? For that matter, is it even relevant? Forget it being effective, right? Um, it depends, right? Like that's where it starts becoming a little interesting because it's one thing to put a policy down on paper and another to kind of see how it manifests in terms of implementations and controls and downstream ramifications and are they getting adjusted to the changing reality, which is changing every day practically, right? Um, I think it's a whole spectrum. There are some companies that are actively trying to, discuss say, things around, hey, what does identity in the world of agentic AI looks like? For
Mm-hmm.
example, that is quite a conversation. We even saw some proactive acquisitions lately where companies have jumped in and bought companies that are talking about agentic identity. So there's a bit of that going on one front, and we don't even know what that means. We don't even know how it will pan out. But it's an interesting topic. So there are people who are kind of getting deep into the the technicalities and ramifications and how you can control them or should you even control them. What does boundary look like? Et cetera, et cetera. Right. So there are some companies who are there. And then there's some others who are treating this the more traditional way and saying, oh, can we put a firewall around it? Can DLP solve my problem? Right. And some of this, yes, it will. Some of this, for sure, it will. But this is a little more complex because, the moment you have AI doing human type works, it's beyond simple filters, right? Because ultimately, those are, some form of filters, they're smart filters. This is also about the fact that, by itself, that activity might look just normal, but it may have some interesting downstream activity or downstream impact, right? And so that's something that you may not even be able to control, right? Um, so that people aren't understanding, right? And then last but not the least, I think the more important bit is uh, what are the real sort of on the ground controls and on the ground ways to manage it, to monitor it, to be on top of it, right? Now, some
Right.
are taking the traditional approach, and there's nothing wrong with it. I think that's good. It provides a structure where they're saying, well, let's get certified, and let's follow a governance mechanism. So there are some companies that are taking that route where they're saying, okay, I'm going to go follow the ISO 42001 spec or use the NIST AI RMF or, some other sort of AI guardrail or AI framework. And there are quite a few now, right? Like which are available. So you can pick yours that you like and, you can use that as a sort of governing structure and say, okay, let me now see how I implement it and what I do. Um, and some others are saying, well, that's too formal, and that's more in terms of exercise that gets me audited and gets me a certificate. But I don't know if that really helps me buy some real coverage. So I'm going to go the other route and start looking at it more from the bottoms up. Who's using it, and then those folks are now doing a lot more the same way that there were initiatives to figure out shadow IT or shadow, sort of cloud instances being spun up in the past, and those were looked at as threats. Well, these guys are more in the discovery mechanism. They're saying, let's focus a bit more on discovery. Let's try and understand where our employees, where our developers, where our teams are actually taking advantage of AI and how it is impacting us and let's go figure that out. But I feel that in all of them, I mean, all of them are good mechanisms. I don't think there's any bad mechanism. Then all of them have holes, right? And sometimes the depth and breadth to these holes is unknown, right? So
Right.
um, that's where the question comes up, right? So for example, like I'll give you a simple example. Let's say
Sure.
you have all the guardrails on shadow AI and nobody's deploying an AI application in your company. Let's just assume that, a good clean slate. Even that doesn't mean you're protected from AI because the IDE you may be using, the the payroll application that you may be using, the CRM that you may be using, the communication system that you may be using, that may be using AI behind the scenes, right? And it probably is, right? So then the question is, um, your data is still going there. Your decisions are still being impacted, even if you are not directly doing it, right? And so then the question becomes, um, what all do you switch off? Are you going to be one of those companies who will, switch off everything and start living in the what I would call today's corporate wilderness, because that's what you'll end up having to do, basically opt out from everywhere, not allow any employee to use any of these AI features, switch off AI from everywhere, right? And I don't think that's practical, or and I don't even think it's possible. Forget practical, right? Because there may be products today you still have the option to switch off. There might be products 6 months out, a year, 2 years out, which there might be like no product without uh, you know, without switching like without AI. So if you switch off AI, there is no product, right? Like
Right.
there might not be one, right? So that's the whole sort of ramification here, right? Like that you have to. It's good that initiatives are on, but I think we've got some distance to go
Absolutely.
establishing it.
I will tell you a funny story. Maybe it will come funny to you, Shashank. So I think last week or the week before, someone called me and he said, like, hey, like you meet a lot of people, and like I know you follow the technology. I'm looking for a very special solution. I said, yeah, tell me what if I can help. Sure, for sure. He said, I'm looking for something that would not allow my people to put like company data in these LLMs. I said, inside the company. He said, no, outside of the company. I said, okay. I'm sorry to tell you, like, you need to wait until Elon Musk's Neuralink comes out, and then you can plant chips in your employees' brain so they don't go and spell out. He started said, what? I said, you can't. I just give him a simple example. I said, look, like some of the company's data is already online. Like, the thing
Right.
that, and some of that are online and you are not aware. And this is where the threat intelligence comes into. I said, but, there is nothing that can stop. Let's say you're someone who's, I will not say the CFO, but maybe someone who's in the finance department who have kind of, they know the P&L, they on a high level they still remember the number, and they're gonna go and put it in ChatGPT, maybe innocently, just to draw them a chart, right? And then I
Right.
said they don't have to do it inside the company because they can go home, they can use their own personal accounts, and they can spell this information out. I said it's hard. So I think, we used to talk early days in the cybersecurity about, the awareness and, like how you need to, for example, don't share your password with people you don't know, like don't do this,
Mm-hmm.
don't do that. I think now with the AI part of, getting people up to speed. I'm not sure if you agree with me, Shashank. Like, but this education, like, why it's important also, explain to people why they don't have to put this information in any LLM, right? And probably I'm more with companies to allow people to use LLMs, but within the company boundaries, so they don't feel they need to do it in secret when they go back home. So maybe I don't
Right.
know how it's done, right? So this is on the point you just mentioned. I don't know if you have anything you want to comment on this before I ask you the next question.
No, no, I'm agreeing with you. I think that's absolutely true. I mean, it is just becoming more and more pervasive, right? In everything that we do as a part of our not only organization, but just generally life at large, and in everything that we consume. The same way that if you make an argument today, saying somehow you cut out technology, and there are some people
Right,
who are able to do it because, like, hey, my privacy gets invaded. I don't want any technology to be tracking me. Let's just say that you are on that quest, and sure, you get rid of your cell phone, you become a hermit, you don't go anywhere online, you get rid of all your online personas. Yeah, you might go that distance, but there are extremely few people who might be able to just survive meaningfully in that kind of a mode, primarily because the whole world has become so connected. So it may not be you, but if you have to speak to somebody, well, you have to get out a messaging app. If you need to go and interact with somebody, you're probably in some sort of a network, social or otherwise, right? And
right,
if you have a device, I'm sure we still had some options till some time ago to say, hey, you can use a flip phone versus a smartphone. I'm pretty sure a few years out, there won't be such a thing as a flip phone. It might be a vanity thing. Maybe that's something would be like today you buy those hand crank watches or something. I mean, it might be more of a it will go into that league. You know what I mean? It'll actually be expensive item that will be a collector's edition, but everything else will be smart, a so-called smartphone, or and then you take that a notch up with AI. Like, yeah, it's coming. I don't think
right.
there's any escaping it. Escape is not the solution for sure. Is what I'm agreeing with you. I think it's a
Yeah,
matter of managing it, driving awareness, helping people understand, helping people make their own decisions. I think that's better than escaping for sure.
absolutely. Now I gotta ask you, Shashank, because I'm sure with what you're currently doing at Uno, you speak with a lot of senior decision makers who, of course, back in the, I'm sure it's still top of mind. Of course, cybersecurity is top of mind, but AI is also top of mind. So again, last year these headlines were full, sometime from big companies that they do this research, and they were saying like X amount. I don't have the exact number, so that's why I'm making it generic. Like companies discovered that they spend this amount of money and they get only like maybe, I think only less than 10% they get like some kind of ROI on their
Hmm.
AI spendings and all this. So now when it comes to in general and what you do, what leaders really are looking for in terms of ROI? So what are the real metrics, I would say, that they'll tell you, Shashank, for example, what you are doing at Uno matters for us because, let's say, I don't know, cutting costs. You can like tell us a
Hmm.
little more about, the generic view of these senior leaders, whether in cyber or in the IT teams, who are now having maybe imperatives to deploy AI, but at the same time they don't want to waste their company's money also as well at the same time.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's an important topic to discuss and think about. So you're absolutely right, Mehmet. The I guess the initial spend was more euphoria, excitement driven, right? Like every leader wanted to be on that wave. Definitely didn't want to be left behind. There was also a little bit of a FOMO, if you may, that had been built up. So everyone wanted to jump in and get an AI project going, and then bring this newer technology to their advantage, so they could grow the business faster and do more things, right? And then, as it happens with every technology, I don't think this is unique to AI. Um, you can jump into a technology, but the importance is like you have to spend some time, energy, money, effort more than anything else to really map it back to what use cases would be applicable in your domain, in your company, in your business, where it could have the most amount of impact, right? Or where it could benefit the most. But when you're trying to rush through something in a hurry, you don't have the time and energy to spend that effort. And I think that's what we saw happen in the what I call the phase one of AI adoption, where it was more of a rush to get AI projects off the door. And then, of course, there was also a lot of push from vendors and hype at large. So people jumped in, and AI projects were unfolded, POCs were sort of conducted with no clarity on forget ROI, even applicability sometimes. Things were built that was unclear how that use case really even applied to the business. Or was it even the most relevant use case? Or was it something that they should really indulge in? Right. So yeah, so we went through that journey. And I think much of that was also talked about from researchers in universities to industry analysts saying, hey, 90% of projects are failing, people are disillusioned, etc., right? But the ground reality is that was the classic sort of early curve or early adoption curve of every technology. And so today, as I speak to leaders, especially now, and it started actually late last year itself, um, the dialogue has changed from saying, hey, let's just have an AI project, to now saying, let's figure out which are the right candidates where AI can actually help us. And as you rightly said, what does right candidate mean? Well, right candidate really, in organizational perspective, simply means one of the two things. It either increases the top line in some fashion or the other, or helps us manage the bottom line better, right? Like that's the beginning and end of most corporate decisions, really, right? And so that's where I think most of the ROI is being measured today. Like if you bring in AI, can we get more productive? Can we get things done faster? Can we do things at scale? Can we do more things with the same resources, right? So that's where the top line driven ROI is on one side of the spectrum. On the other, also because there are a lot of pressures in industry today, from competition to, again, just sort of economic uncertainty. There's also a desire to save costs. There's also a desire to get more efficient. There's also a desire to make sure that you manage your resources well. So there's a second sort of ROIs that is being measured by saying, hey, do I need to continuously hire people, or can I scale with technology beyond a certain point in time? Can I save costs by, in some ways, using technology to replace manual activity? Right? Can I save costs by avoiding certain steps that otherwise I'd have to do? Right. So it's one of the two that is now being measured quite furiously, I would say, and quite actively in companies, right? And so if that is justified, either the top line or the bottom line, I think there's definitely still a lot of applicability. And funny you bring this up. In fact, I was speaking to a customer today, towards the end of my day today, and this was exactly where the conversation was. We were really sitting together and trying to craft out the ROI, right? And the question was not just about blind ROI, but it was
Hmm.
ROI where the situation is at least at par and maybe better than status quo. And what I mean by that is, I'll give you a little more specific example.
Sure.
So, for example, a lot of people are talking about vibe coding being a force multiplier, or completely replacing your marketing agency with um, some AI chatbots, for example, right? Like these are very common things that are being discussed today. Now, of course, this is not a segment we work in, but I see these conversations happen all the time. And the question here is, okay, great, understand, the coding can be done faster, but then what's the overhead of maintaining it, right? Can I actually take that to production quickly, or is this going to be more prototype code that would look fancy and quick wins, but then ultimately I'll have to spend twice the money to really, take it live, right? So those kinds of questions are being asked, for example, today, which were not being asked even a few months ago. And this is the classic ROI question. It's like looking at the total cost of ownership as opposed to just, simply the small productivity gain from, one task being done differently. Um, so I think that's happening. That's happening today everywhere, right? So people want that reliability, people want the dependability of their current status quo. But of course, if we can do that faster, we can do it more scale, we can do it with fewer resources, people will take it. And that's where there is a massive demand out there. So
Right.
yeah, so that's where the conversation is today.
It makes a lot of sense because I call it go back to basics, right? Like, yeah,
Indeed.
regardless what technology you're selling is, whether it's AI, whether it's like whatever it is, right? So we talk about, how I can take it from point A to point B, and this point A to point B can be reducing cost, increasing productivity, as you said. Maybe it's allowing them to increase revenue because maybe they will be able to reach like more customers and all
Right.
these things, and also like one part which is you play in Shashank, which is because you deal with the risk, so of course reducing risk, which actually it leads to reducing cost also as well, because if you have you're not compliant, you're gonna pay a fine. If you have a risk which is not uncovered or not well documented, again it's a loss for the business. Now, on the point of vibe coding, just my perspective is, because two things I want to say, and I would like to hear your opinion on this. Not about the vibe coding itself, about AI writing code. I think we know like AI now can pretty much write, I would not say excellent code, but a code that can show you something and it's
Mm-hmm.
enhancing.
Yeah, yeah.
But I put blame because some people, they see me also as a content creator in a way, although like I'm not professionally a content creator. This is just a hobby, I call it, and just a
Right.
way to get people like yourself to share their thoughts. Of course, I share my thoughts as well. So, but a lot of content creators, I've seen them. I don't want to say I blame them, but they play a role in having this hype about the vibe coding, and I see these articles like, yeah, this is the last tool you would want, and then you're gonna build all your systems, and uh like, rest in peace SaaS, because now you can build I don't know what in. And I'm telling people, look, I tried all the vibe coding tools, of course not the advanced one. I didn't go to the codex and these kinds of things, but I mean
Right.
the
Right.
the traditional suspects, like the replets and the vertexes and the
Mm-hmm.
lovable and these things. I say, like, see, they are amazing, amazingly good, excellent.
Right.
I
Right.
said, but put in mind, if you decide to use these tools to build products actually within your enterprise, prepare yourself to hire a full-time product manager, because it's not like you just build a CRM and that's it. Because a CRM, what
Mm-hmm.
made a CRM is it kept enhancing over time. It kept in adding features to it. You heard what you people they want, and then you took it. So it's not just about building the product with vibe coding. It's about, like, what are you trying actually to achieve, and have you calculated, and of course, again, we talk about the risks and the cybersecurity part. Is it secure? And we saw a lot of examples where people, they built something using vibe coding tools.
Mm-hmm.
Authentication is not there. It can actually, the latest one, actually they changed the name. I forget what they called. There was this cloud bot, which is CLAWD. They had to change the name because of
Right.
yeah,
Right. It's been in
yeah.
the
So,
news.
yeah, so it's been on the news, and they figured, I'm just trying to get the right name now. Yeah, so it's now called. They changed it to Maltball, which
Mm-hmm.
is a weird name.
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah, so people are thinking, yeah, AI is making things easy, but it's coming at the cost of security. It's getting at the cost of also the user experience. What's your take on that, Shashank?
Yeah, you said a lot of things, and I think almost everything you said is very relevant. So my take is that I think there are two or three things we need to think about, and we should maybe back up a little bit and up level and look at the broader call it the productivity treadmill, if you may, if I were to call it that, right?
Sure.
Um, so the adrenaline rush of vibe coding is high. There's no two ways of that, right? Like today we are intoxicated with that vibe coding excitement. It's like, yeah, I can churn out applications in 2 days as opposed to doing it in longer periods of time. And if you really think about it, just software development as a profession, I mean, it's been sort of going in that direction for a few years, right? So from assembly coding to higher order languages to IDEs to libraries to open source code kind of already accelerating your development, where you don't have to write every single thing, that you lean on them to kind of build your systems. And then, of course, all the community help with very vibrant Stack Overflow and other things that were around for long periods of time. Developers have seen increase in productivity and change in the way that they code. Like that's already been happening, right? So that's not new. Like I know that it has become more commonplace and people are excited about like, yeah, I just write a prompt and it writes code for me. Um, and sure, that's phenomenal as compared to where we were before that. But we what we were doing even 2 years ago was phenomenal compared to what people used to do 10 years ago, and it's amazingly phenomenal compared to what people used to do 20 years ago, right? I mean, just I'll remind the people who were probably not even born in that generation, having grayed my hair long enough, that back in late 1990s, when web servers were first generation, right, and they were not as fast, connectivity wasn't as smooth as it is today. If you had a core dump or you had a bug, you actually looked up a physical manual. I don't know if I say that, most of the people would like scratch their head and say, "What are you talking about?" Right? Like that's not a thing. But you actually looked up a physical manual. Like if there was a database error, or there was a programming error, you literally opened a book, a manual that is provided by the manufacturer of the technology, like an SPUX book and an Oracle, whatever, like debug book with all these, and you literally read through the stack traces, if you think about it in parallel terminology in today's time, right? So that's where we were 25 years ago, right? And now, if you look at it today, that has transformed from nobody opening a damn book to debug code ever. They used to go into Google searches or they go to Stack Overflow or something like that, right? And sure, that is now transformed into AI, where you don't even have to do that, right? You write prompts and say, hey, this is what I would like to accomplish. So yes, first thing is like, yeah, productivity is enhancing, and yes, we keep going further. But as you rightly said, I think in terms of a product per se, the coding aspect of it is just a small part of that puzzle. And in fact, this is something that stuck with me for a long time when I was myself early in my career, and I was fortunate enough to work with some incredibly smart engineers over the years. And there was one very simple statement. It's not even like something completely new, but very meaningful, where the person was just trying to emphasize and say that most code in the world is written once, but managed, evolved, and read multiple times over the years, over the generations. And that same person was also emphasizing that many a times when you read your own code that you've written 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it looks very alien. You don't follow your own code. And that's a thing. And that's very common because, of course, you moved on as a person. Your ability to write code at that point in time was different. And then, of course, when you're debugging, adding features on an existing code base, there's a certain level of understanding that you have to have so that you can do it in a mature manner. And at that point in time, and even later, it's less about coding. It's more about understanding the user's needs, understanding the product management, as you rightly said, making architectural decisions, understanding the ramifications of what would happen if I change the code. So there's a lot more of the decision making and activity which is beyond coding. Like coding is a very small piece of the puzzle. There's everything else outside of coding that really makes your product and your code itself, for that matter, more robust, right? Now
Yeah.
you fast forward that to today's time, when you had difficulty dealing with, the fastest of programmers would be writing few lines of code, a few hundred lines of code a day, right? And you had difficulty keeping yourself, at pace with a few hundred lines of code a day. Now with you writing prompts and the prompts at least spinning out hundreds of thousands of lines of code, perhaps in a single day, will make you guess how are you going to be on top of it. What do you know about the, like you mentioned, security issues or design issues or stability issues or design choices that have been made? You're not going to go read the entire 100,000 lines of code that has been churned out for you, because if you did, well, it'll eat up into your whole premise of productivity, isn't it? If you have to go back and review every line of code, what's the point of doing vibe coding? You might as well just write it, right? So there's this weird dichotomy of, the more of it is not necessarily going to make you better and faster. Sure, there would be some adrenaline rush. Yes, it would be excellent for fast prototyping. Yes, in some cases, it would be incredibly beautiful, but it's not a universal sort of promise that will solve all problems. So that's one part of the puzzle. The second and important part of the puzzle, which is equally important to think about, is that a lot of the code that these LLMs write today, in particular, doesn't matter which technology it is, it's actually built its premise and promise on top of code that existed in the web before that. So a
Right.
lot of the current generation of smarts that, let's say, Claude Code does, or any of the others for that matter, are putting out there, it's on the shoulders of open source code, right? Code fragments that were actually submitted to Stack Overflow, or blog posts that people wrote, because it's really the web that kind of taught and trained these tools, if you may. Um, Now here's a dichotomy: as more and more people write AI-driven code, at some point in time, as it happening with AI slop, as they call it, with AI content as well, you are not really raising the bar. So a lot of the future generation of coding tools are going to be trained on code that is written by AI. So which means effectively, like, if AI is doing these errors or bringing these flaws in, they will actually infuse flaws at scale.
Yeah.
If there is it's holes, there'll be holes at scale, right? So now you are going to inherit a different problem, right? Which is going to happen with internet content already, where people are already worrying there is just so much of slop content in the universe now, that it's hard to even find meaningful stuff. That's in fact often a pain now, and even on social media, people say, I don't want to look at these AI generated comments. Show me a human written comment, right? Or a human
Right.
written video, right? And so I think like the same thing would happen with code. And then last but not least on that spectrum is, you would have seen this, the AI code generators, and we're just getting deeper into the rabbit hole of vibe coding, but in in vibe coding, if you may, it actually does very well with some common code like Python and a few other of those sort of languages and certain type of a coding style. And the reason for that is there was a lot more of that type of a code that was available on the web for it to get trained on.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you really step back, we have had technologies, tools, coding languages, coding styles evolve over the years depending on what systems we have been building, and then some amalgamation with. There was a time when it made sense everything to be written in C, C++, because that was basically lingua franca, and then higher level languages came about, and everyone had their day. There was the times of Java and the times of Python, especially in the data science era. We've seen Golang come and go. We've seen multiple others, right? And these days, for example, Rust is kind of the new one that people talk about. And I'm sure tomorrow's and day after's languages will be, different and different.
True.
Um, the question is, will you have enough corpus built out? Will you have enough creative people then left around to really have that innovation and build out all these pieces in an organic, fresh manner when everybody starts white coding? Like, this is more of a human choice that you're thinking of, right? In the past, we've come here because a lot of people really, even hobbyists, open source contributors, educationists, common people who just enjoyed coding, really kind of, accelerated that profession and accelerated the way coding emerged over the years. So that is why we are here today, right? As a society. And the question is, like, if everybody gives up on that, everybody says, no, I would just rather write prompts and let the machine write it for me. I wonder if we would start seeing a plateauing and tapping out of creativity. Will they be basically a creativity void, which is a very important part of coding or conceiving or thinking or building something new? So yes, we'll have a lot more clones of DocuSign, a lot more clones of, you know, um, um, Workday, and a lot more clones that look like Salesforce. But what about the next generation Salesforce? Because when Salesforce was being written back in 2001, there was no Salesforce, right? When DocuSign or Airbnb was being thought of, there was no Airbnb, right? So what I mean to say is that all these were new, fresh ideas that were born at a time because they were conceived by people in creative ways, and then they took shape over the years in a certain way. And so I just feel like, is vibe coding alone, though, sort of solution to that problem? And the answer, in my opinion, is no. And as you rightly said, there's a lot more to it than just simply accelerating your coding, right? And so I think going back to that, and sorry for the long-winded answer here, but the whole proclamation that, oh, all the SaaS companies are going to die, and we'll see everything white coded away. I don't buy into that premise. What I do buy into is that yes, there'll be productivity enhancement. Yes, the style we code might change. Yes, the way we use these tools will certainly evolve. But is that going to eat up the whole universe? Probably not.
No.
Not in my book. Don't think it's happening. There's so much more to that puzzle than simply faster coding.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you, Shashank, on this one. Yeah. And, this is, it's stuck in my head now about, the same thing we used to call it like garbage in, garbage out about the content. So now the same thing going to happen with code. Of course, time will show us what these machines would be able to do. Maybe, they will find a way to get this, I would not call it creativity, but more into like maintaining this evolution of the way how we do the coding. Time will show us, of
Right.
course. Shashank, as we are coming close to an end, like what is exciting about Uno.ai that you can share with us, which is maybe something coming in the near future?
Yeah, so we have been stretching the boundary quite a bit and, continuously innovating, while I would say staying grounded, right? So, which is why we chose to do this sort of, vertical, if you may, very regulated space, a place that likes reliability and accuracy. But we've been innovating, fairly rapidly, um, both in terms of technique, but also in terms of what the system can do. Very excited, very proud of the team and everybody who has contributed and worked and been part of this journey so far, where we've gone from a fledgling idea into a real platform and system that multiple companies around the world are taking advantage of, and a lot of very large Fortune 500 companies to big advisories have leaned on, right? So very exciting in that front. Now, looking forward, the way I think about it is I think there are two pieces which are definitely there in this year's plan, in 2026. And, of course, they'll keep evolving. The one bit that we definitely want to do more is we have made some really big strides around what I called automation of human centric tasks. So in
Mhm.
our system today, you can not only just do simple workflow automation, but you can actually do complete automation around, understanding a control or writing a control test plan or doing control analysis and validation. So everything that a human would do, a lot of that gets automated out totally on the platform, just as an example, right? Or even risk management, quantification, remediation, assessment, even to the extent that reading and determining the tier or where stuff are, all this the system does. And it does that in a very reliable, accurate manner. And so that's been quite phenomenal. So we want to go further, right? We want to do more and more of that, more of the human task automation, with the goal, of course, of keeping it accurate, keeping it sort of reliable, right? So like that's something that we are really looking forward to. So that's a big one. Well, the second one that I think, which is equally exciting, and this is less, I would say, from just a technological innovation. I mean, there's a lot more technological innovation occurring, but um, we almost see ourselves in some ways as a movement in our industry. And that was not the mission when we started, but I think it has eventually converged into it because we're also learning a lot more about domain and sector. And what we see there is a little bit of a dichotomy between the importance of this domain of governance, risk, compliance, third party supply chain risk, business continuity. Like these things are important topics. But because traditionally they have been very onerous or traditionally they've been difficult to manage, many times they become very process driven,
Mhm.
where we are lost as humans more in the process than the spirit of what we want to accomplish. And I can't blame people because it is onerous and it is very process driven in many cases. The fact that you have to create reams of paperwork or do a lot of work, to kind of bring it all together, sometimes that's very bogging down, right? So you never elevate yourself to a point where you say, well, how do I mature my program? How do I really take advantage of it? You're always caught up in that, sort of a daily fight, if you may. Um, we want the industry to mature and go beyond the daily fight. And so this is where our first mission also comes in, where we're saying like, if we automate away all the mundane, the tedious, the human centric tasks that are not even fun but are necessary to then do the more higher advanced, human decision making, hopefully we'll unlock the time and capacity and mind space for people to really indulge in that true excellence of the discipline, where people will then enjoy having conversations about, what does risk really imply in my scenario? How do I manage it? Am I able to manage it? How far am I able to team it? Right. So we want to take the industry there. Like I said, that wasn't our goal when we started, but I think as we have started seeing more and more success, and also we're learning from our customers, partners, ecosystem at large, that has certainly become our goal, right? So this year we will also spend a good bit of time furthering that goal, and we don't want to do it in isolation. So we'll do that with the community, with the ecosystem members and partners, and we are certainly very open to ideas as well. So I also very welcome anybody who's sort of listening to this conversation and says, "Hey, I got an idea to make it better." Well, bring it on, right? Like that's something that we definitely want to do. We want to remain humble, we want to remain hungry, and we want to learn from you. So if you got some interesting ideas there, which we can add to the mix, and as the community, we all then do more value-added work. It would be fun, right? It would make us happy, and it would make the world better, right? So we are definitely very committed to that and excited about it. So I think those are the two things that I'm looking forward to it, and hoping 2026 will be the year for more of that.
Great. And, I have no doubt that you will have a great success in that, Shashank. And, just for the audience, I advise you to go to the website, try to get in touch also as well. I'm a little bit biased because I consider Shashank a friend now. He's one of the people like, who delivers on what he said. Like maybe the audience who's listening to the first episode, I advise you to go to the first and second one we recorded like in 2024, 2025, and you will see, like this journey and the path that Shashank have followed, like delivering on something that really mattered to the customers. And, I would call it more, as you said, grounded over hype, which is actually what we need a lot in these days. So, Shashank, I can't thank you enough. I know how busy it can, and you stayed late in your night today for having this great conversation. So thank you very, very much for doing so. I'm gonna put the links in the show notes so people who can get in touch. And this is how I end my episodes usually. I tell audience, if you just discovered us and you like it, please share it with your friends, colleagues, and as many people as you can, because we're trying to do an impact here. And if you are one of the people who keep coming again and again, thank you very much. You keep putting us, everywhere. I see you share also the podcast with your friends. I see like also you talk about it even without me being there. So I appreciate that. And I can see that in the results because the traffic doesn't lie, and I can see also the top 200 Apple Podcast charts in different countries. I'm still waiting, my friends, in the US. It's the only country we didn't enter yet in North America, so waiting for that. But yeah, like this cannot happen without all your support. And as I say always, stay tuned for a new episode very soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, Mehmet, for having me again on your show.
Thank you.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.